Alf, thanks. Helen?
Do you want me to?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, we're going to run through all three and then ask
Is
questions.
this on now?
Should be.
Can you hear me? Yeah? Good, okay. So thank you very much for, it's nice to be back here, and also hello to new face, Judge Damrell. Nice to meet you. When Dan called me to ask if I could participate, I said, couldn't you reschedule this for next week? And the reason is that we are going to be coming out with the major part of the study that we've been doing on multiple stressors, management of multiple stressors in the Delta ecosystem, next week on Tuesday, April 30th. So I'm going to give you the movie trailer sort of version, and on my way up here, maybe not coincidentally, this was sort of interesting to hear, was a conversation between Terry Gross and the creator of Mad Men, and they were talking, among other things, about how the trailers for next week on Mad Men give you no information at all. So I'm going to try to do I'm going to try to do better than that, but sort of whet your appetite for what I hope will be a useful set of documents for you. What we're going to be releasing, we've already, and this is with the Brain Trust that I've had the pleasure to work with over time on other reports on the Delta and also some broader water management. So the folks from the UC Davis Watershed Sciences Center, as well as Buzz Thompson from Stanford and Brian Great from UC Hastings. We released the first couple of pieces of this study looking at how to do a better job of managing for multiple stressors in the Delta ecosystem in the summer of last year. That a couple of those pieces, one that sort of just defined how we are thinking about stressors in a way that is digestible for policy making, and then another called Where the Wild Things Aren't, where we hope they will be again, I guess is the implicit subtitle, looking at a realistic vision for what one might think about in terms of management of the Delta ecosystem, given all of the changes that have happened to date and in recognition of the co-equal goals and the acknowledgement that people are going to need to continue using the land and water resources of the Delta and the watershed. So now what we're going to be releasing is a synthesis report and then three additional more detailed pieces that look, one of them, which I think will be especially useful for you, is that look at institutional and legal options regarding more integrated management of ecosystem stressors, and where we go into some detail about the Council's role, as well as the role of a lot of other agencies involved in both regulation and management. And then there's a piece that looks at, in some detail, estimating costs of a whole wide array of management actions, going beyond the kinds of things that BDCP is looking at. And then the results of a couple of surveys that we did last summer, one of scientists working on the Delta ecosystem from a combination of universities as well as federal and state agencies, as well as consulting firms and other agencies, basically scientists who are publishing in scientific journal, peer-reviewed journals on the Delta, and then one that asked a lot of the same kinds of questions to stakeholders and policymakers. And the goal of those surveys was to use that from the scientist surveys to get a sort of synthetic view on how scientists are viewing the causes of stress in the Delta ecosystem, where they anticipate those going in the future in terms of sort of which things are likely to be most impactful or most problematic in the future, and then critically looking at getting their sense of the potential impact of a wide range of management actions to address the wide range of stressors. What we asked the stakeholders and policymakers was to provide their sense both of the relative importance of various stressors on where we are now, and then also to provide their sense of what they thought were the top priority actions. So that's the teaser on that part. Stay tuned for that on next Tuesday for more, and we'll also be having an event in Sacramento, which is open to the public, and everyone's welcome to sign up if you haven't yet, on May 10th, with some great panels to talk about some of the recommendations. So that's the sort of wind up. And now what I'll do is, I think, give you just a little bit of a flavor of the kind of things that we're thinking about in terms of the council's role. And this role, really thinking about exactly sort of now that the Delta Plan is there, and we think that it does really do a nice job in a concise way of talking about the range of ecosystem stressors that are at play both within the legal delta and Suisun Marsh, but also within the greater watershed. Because I mean, clearly, some of the fish that are listed are just passing through the delta. So obviously, the conditions upstream are critically important for them as well. And what happens in the upper watershed is critically important for those fish that are living in the delta all the time. And we are focusing on fish, recognizing that there are many other species that matter too, but that seems to be the toughest nut to crack. So, Delta Plan is a good start on this. In terms of thinking about challenges of management and better management of ecosystem stressors in order to get to a more sustainable ecosystem and a healthier ecosystem, fragmentation among institutions is going to be a real potential roadblock. And there have been a lot of ways in which there's been progress, both through the kind of processes that are laid out in the Delta Reform Act, but also the kinds of things that agencies have been trying to do in recognition of that. And perhaps one of the CalFed legacies is that some of that stuff is happening better in terms of communication among the various offices within EPA that deal with pesticide regulation and the state side on that. There's progress there, even though we're not there altogether. But clearly we've got an alphabet soup of agencies that are involved in regulating various different stressors, as well as in implementing, doing management actions on the ground. So the challenge is going to be to figure out how to make that work better without creating some, unified, mega overarching boss that does everything, because that in and of itself wouldn't be a solution probably anyway. You'd still have different offices in that mega agency. So roles for the council, one of them, and it kind of relates to Alf's point about planning. The Delta Reform Act gives you some regulatory, some enforcement capabilities. It limits that to local actions and state non-regulatory actions within the statutory delta and Suisun Marsh. We think that's important. That's an important piece that was missing, in the sense that there wasn't a capability to do that for some critical land use decisions in particular. We're certainly not recommending that needs to be extended beyond anywhere else. That's been a discussion that's been had many times, and the law was written the way it was for good reasons, and a lot of the pushback that you've gotten over the last couple years from various parties has probably helped to explain why. But we do think that the council can play a really valuable role as the expert agency on the Delta in using its authority to provide non-binding consistency reviews of all the other stuff that could really matter to the ecosystem. And so that means state regulatory actions. That means whether they're within the legal Delta and Suisun Marsh or relating to upstream activities. So state regulatory actions, federal actions, be they implementation or regulatory type actions, and then local actions outside the delta that are relevant. And the thought here is that a non-binding consistency review can provide a signal that something is consistent or not with the Delta Plan. It's the kind of thing that some agencies, frankly, might want to ask you to do for their planning efforts, because that will provide some heft to, assuming that you do say it is consistent, will provide some heft to the authority of those actions. And if you say it's not consistent, then that may lead them to want to tweak it to make it consistent. So it's something one can think of not as a sort of negative, thou shalt not do things, but more as something that can be proactive and positive in helping the various parties involved to set their own plans in ways that are consistent with the Delta plan, which, as Alf noted, will be an evolving, living document. So that's on the planning side. And then on the implementation side, we held a lot of small workshops with folks to discuss some of the implementation challenges related to agency and institutional fragmentation, and it struck us that the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee was one of those things that just was kind of not on people's radar and just not exciting, and sort of to the extent that anybody, we asked people about it, it would be, oh yeah, whatever, kind of. And we think, actually, this is something that could be really useful. And it's not through, your enforcement authority that you can make that useful, but it's through making it a really visible tool for coordination and in a variety of ways. And so, one of the thoughts there is, in terms of making this useful, is requiring all the agencies to present their near-term and longer-term plans for what they're going to do to help implement the Delta plan. That gets presented, public forum, chance for discussions about, hey, how do we make, agency X's plan consistent with agency Y's? In theory now, we've got good dialogue on agencies wanting to work together. I mean, they have their own constraints as to why that's sometimes hard. So this is the way to help to have those conversations. And then it's a great way to hold agencies accountable for, when they come back next year, how'd they do? What were the reasons why they weren't able to do something if they weren't? That's an opportunity to then, if you're finding that there are regulatory inconsistencies, things where legislative fixes could help, that you can report that back to the legislature at the state level. But this is co-equal goals are also part of federal law now. So, and the feds have certainly been wanting to work with California on this opportunity to report that back at the federal level too. So we see that as really something that could be the big thing. And then I'll just sort of finish by saying we also think, I noticed the various ad hoc committees that you're thinking about for the, I don't know, how do we pronounce that? Is it DPIC or Delta Plan? Or I don't know. It's not a great acronym to say, but we think that this entity could play a really valuable role in adaptive management, not just in a sort of advisory way, but perhaps actually being the umbrella organization for that. And I'll stop there, and I hope you're still going to stay tuned for the full movie later.
Yes, May 10th.
Well, so the reports will all be available on the PPIC website, actually, I think at 9 p.m. on April 29th. And then the public event, where we've got a great set of panelists, including your chair, Phil Eisenberg, but also others, that'll be May 10th.